So, as the first week of free agent frenzy comes to a close, I decided I'm going to break down the Panthers' free agent moves and kind of show you the projection that Dan Morgan is going to take this team. Now, obviously, the Brian Burns trade was a big deal for both franchises. The Giants who got him and us who traded him. But I'm going to break that down in another video. It's going to come out later tonight because I have a lot of thoughts about that. Give that kind of like the plan of how that happened. But to start off for the free agent moves. Right now, we don't know the cap hit for Josie Jewell or DJ Wenham that just happened a couple of hours ago. But for right now, the cap hit for 2024 is $16 million. That still gives us a little bit of room to potentially sign some other players and then also save that cap for the draft. On top of that, the 2025 cap is $107 million. So that gives us a good chunk of change for next year where we can potentially, once we kind of fix this team to the mold that Dave Canales wants it to be, we can make even bigger splashes. Now, obviously, there was more cuts that were coming in the beginning stages of free agency once that time period happened. Now, one of those cuts ended up being a trade, but the three major cuts that we had was Hayden Hurst being cut. I'm assuming it was because of the health risk, obviously, where he had his concussion problem that delved into like a very, very serious issue. I'm assuming that's the reason why he got cut, because it does leave a big hole for the tight end. Bradley Bozeman, I believe he got cut because of scheme fit. There was some rumor that said that because he talked back to Bryce Young. I don't think that's the case. I think that's like chalk. That's just basically people just trying to make a story happen. And then Von Bell got cut. Obviously, I think he kind of saw that we're still kind of rebuilding. This is a soft rebuild, something that we're actually finally doing. And I think that, so that he can go to the Bengals, and that's where he re-signed. Now, who do we actually sign? Obviously, we paid guards a lot, which is very good for Bryce because same as I think that happened with Drew Brees. As a Panthers fan, you probably seen Drew Brees in his prime when he had elite guard play. You had Jari Evans and you had Ben Grubbs for the longest time. So I'm actually really happy about that. And then I'll talk more about their contracts not being as big as people think. Robert Hunt got 5 years, $100 million. Damian Lewis got 4 years, $53 million. Now, when I say the $1 million, just realize the numbers aren't exactly guaranteed. Like the whole entire thing is guaranteed. I think that's where some of our fandom gets a little bit mixed up because they say one thing, but it's really another. And that cap is going to be spread out a lot more, which I'll dive into a little bit deeper. Josie Jewell got 3 years, $22.75 million. And Ashawn Robinson got 3 years, $22.5 million. I love both those pickups for the defense. They fill some holes that obviously we're losing. And also it gives basically Ejiro Evero his guys that he's worked with, that he knows the system, and I think will work really well. And the two other additions are outside that I really, really liked. Dane Jackson, like I said in my free agent video, I really wanted him. We paid a little more than I had thought so, but with the cap hit, I'm very happy with that, which I'll talk a little bit more. Dane Jackson got 2 years, $14.5 million. And then just a couple hours ago, DJ Wenham, South Carolina player, got 2 years, $12.5 million. I liked him coming out of college. I'm really happy we got him. Obviously, outside linebacker, edge rusher was something that we desperately needed. And it's something that I'm really glad that we got in free agency. Now, as far as the re-signings, we re-signed Troy Hill, which I thought that was going to be a good deal too, because he worked well in our system. We also re-signed both our returners. That's Raheem Blackshear and Amir Smith-Marset. I'm really glad that we re-signed both of them. I was really looking into the draft as potential of getting more returners. We weren't going to bring them back, but both of them are excellent, do excellent jobs, and they're both at 1-year deals. Now, as far as the trades, obviously we traded Brian Burns. I'll talk about that in another video coming out later. But that trade was for pick 39 and also for a 2025 fifth. There's a pick swap in 2024. It's basically like just swapping like late round picks. Not that big of a deal, but that was the main part of the deal. And the other trade that initially we were going to cut Dante Jackson, and the same thing that happened with Joe Mixon for the Bengals going to the Texans. You announce that you're going to cut somebody, and then people can negotiate with you like, okay, well, we don't want him to go on free agency and potentially lose him, and we'll trade for him. So we say we're going to cut Dante Jackson, and instead we trade Dante Jackson for Deontay Johnson and a pick swap. I think the trade was a brilliant move by Dan Morgan. We need to get a separator. Adam Thielen is a good separator, but he's also really, really old. And how long can he keep this up? I'm hoping he can. I have faith that he can. But having another guy that we know can get open for Bryce and Deontay Johnson is going to be extremely important for this upcoming year. Now, as I've talked about who we've signed, I'm also going to talk about the cap hits. Now, there are certain times where we look at the number and we're like, oh, this is too much money, but let's see what actually the cap hit. And Brand Tillis did a really good job of structuring these contracts, backloading this contract so we can get the pieces that we need right now because we have the cap space for later on. So 2024 cap hits. Now, we're taking on Deontay Johnson's last year of his contract. That's $10 million for that last year. And if we do re-sign him, then that'll come in later in the season. But for basically either a 1 year rental or maybe even potentially signing him to a future contract, that's a really stinking good deal for you, either number one and number two, depending on what we do in the draft. Robert Hunt and Damian Lewis together are only about $11.55 million together. Robert Hunt, $6.45 million. Damian Lewis, $4.9 million. That's ridiculously low for the amount. Yes, their cap hits increase, the next year, but that is really, really good for this year to be able to put the people that we need in place. And also the contracts aren't that hard to get out of. A'Shawn Robinson is $3.2 million per year, well, in the cap hit, and then Dane Jackson for that 2024 cap hit is going to be $2.65 million in the cap hit. So really, really cheap at the front of the deal. And then now I'm going to go in 2025 cap hits, and that's where they increase significantly. Robert Hunt is going to be $21.65 million. Obviously, it looks really, 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 really steep, but you kind of have to overpay sometimes for people to try to come to a poverty franchise we're in. We're not really in a good situation. Over the years, we've kind of sunk into kind of like a little bit of a slum, and so you have to kind of rebuild your program, and sometimes you have to overpay. Damian Lewis, $14.6 million. I know it's another one where you're just like, that's a really, really big cap hit. And then A'Shawn Robinson, $8.68 million cap hit in 2025. And then lastly, Dane Jackson, $5.85 million in cap hits. I'll say this though, for the 2025, yes, they're kind of big cap hits, but like these are people that are going to be our transition into the new day where Bryce is going to develop. I feel very confident that Bryce is going to develop, and there are some interesting things I'm going to bring up right now, and how we can potentially still make up cap if we get into kind of a situation where we have to sign Derrick Brown or whatnot. So in 2025, there are some potential cuts that we can have if either people underperform or because they're a significant cap increase that we can have if we cut them. And that's Shy Tuttle. If we cut him next year, saves $5 million. That's a lot of money if Shy Tuttle doesn't meet that that threshold. That's his third year of the contract. And if we have someone who either does better that we draft, or like we like someone in the draft or like someone in free agency and we can replace him, that's a potential person that we can cut. Miles Sanders in 2025, if you cut him, you save $2.3 million. Now, granted, next year, if we cut Miles Sanders, we'll be losing Miles Sanders and Chuba Hubbard because Chuba Hubbard is in the last year contract. But that still is potential if we want to re-sign Chuba Hubbard and kind of keep some of that money instead of keeping two running backs on kind of bigger contracts. Now in 2026, this is something that I looked up and I was really interested to see. If Damian Lewis does not work out in 2 years, if like, after his first year where, the cap doesn't really hurt us all that much, but next year where the cap definitely does, and he does not deliver, we can cut Damian Lewis and save $1.5 million. I know that's not significant, but it's still an out if the contract doesn't work out. A'Shawn Robinson, which I don't think we will, but A'Shawn Robinson, if we cut him in 2026, saves $6.5 million. That one was surprising to me. I was like, I don't think we would, but that is very, very significant. That's in the final year of his contract, and you can cut him and save $6.5 million and get either two or three really important pieces for that defense if we still need to kind of like put some fill in some holes. Now, I also want to talk about who do we actually have, because there's been a lot of turnover, and I want to see like what's the actual depth chart, like perceived depth chart that I have for the Panthers going into still remaining in the free agency period and also in the draft picks. So right now we have two quarterbacks. That's Bryce and Andy Dalton. I think that's obviously I don't think that's going to change. I don't think we'll bring in another quarterback. We could, but I think Andy Dalton does a really good job as mentoring Bryce. He gives us a safety blanket if Bryce gets hurt like he did last year against Seattle. And I think that's really good for Bryce's development and also for the team's having a veteran presence. Running back, you have Chuba Hubbard, you have Miles Sanders, and you have Raheem Blackshear. I think that's a really good group. Obviously, it's not the best in the world, but I think that in Dave Canal's system, this is going to work out really well for them. We don't really have a fullback right now, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, but one of these tight ends could potentially move to fullback. I know one who would really work well there, but I think they're probably going to stick with tight end. And those four tight ends that we have right now is Tommy Tremble, Ian Thomas, Steven Sullivan, and Jordan Matthews. I like Jordan Matthews as a receiving threat, and he's also really good at special teams. And I think there's still potential, even if it's not Matthews, I think there is potential for us to keep four tight ends because of the fact that Dave Canales likes to run two tight end set. So it'd be better to have more than just the three. Obviously, J.J. Jansen is technically a tight end, but he's our long snapper. So I'm really glad that we signed him as well. For wide receivers, there's only really five that I see that's going to stay on the roster for sure, and that's Adam Thielen, that's Deontay Johnson, Jonathan Mingo, that's your starting three. And then backups right now is Terrace Marshall Jr. I don't know what we're going to do with him. Obviously, there was some sentiment last year to how he wanted to kind of explore his options. We didn't really give that to him. So it really depends on what Morgan wants to do with TMJ. The other one is, of course, Amir Smith Marset, who the last half of that season, he gave us a spark against the Bears with that punt return. He had a little bit of a connection with Bryce on especially drags and whatnot. So I think that Amir Smith Marset could potentially find himself a role, and I think he's going to stay on this team. I really like him developing and potentially maybe make himself a little bit of a name here. I think that if he does well this year, we might give him a 2-year contract to keep him around for a little bit more as we transition into hopefully a better day. Now, offensive line, this is the first time we've had a really good depth at offensive line. Now, obviously, some of the fans might not agree with me on who we have backing up, but I think that offensive line right now is not the biggest need because of how much we invested and how much we still have backing them up. So to start off, we have Akim Ekwonu, left tackle. They said they're going to stick him there. I believe them. And then obviously by the moves they made in free agency with Damian Lewis, left guard, and Robert Hunt at right guard, they're going to keep him there. I think that's really great for him. I think he's going to do really well in Dave Canal's system. He's going to actually go to his strengths. At center, Austin Corbett. Now, Austin Corbett, he did play center during the Browns preseason when he's a rookie. So that's the only thing that I'm really kind of concerned about. If he still can play center, then he's athletic enough to fit in this system, and I would love for that to happen. But that's potentially offensive line that we could potentially go into in the draft because this is a very good center class. There's like 5 centers that I really like that could potentially take over. And then a right tackle, our guy that has been here for the longest time, that's Taylor Moton, who's been here since 2017. He's seen the transition, and I want to make sure that we keep him for the long run because not only is he great, he's like I would say he's in that 6 to 7 range of right tackles. He's really sticking good, and yes, I think his contract is going to be coming up either next year or the year after that. No, it's coming around that time. I want him to be able for the long run. I want him to be a legacy um, Panther that we can be like, this guy led us into the new age. And that's the kind of guy that I love about Taylor Moton. Now, the backups, uh, Brady Christensen, the left tackle, being a backup. Yes, he technically was guard, but he can also be our swing tackle that he proved during the Matt Rule era that he could still play left tackle, even though Matt Rule was like no. Chandler Zavala struggled mightily in his rookie year, so it's gonna be really good for him to just be a backup to learn the ropes a little bit more. So that's still a little bit cause for concern. Cade Mays, backup center. Cade Mays can play any position on the line, but I think he'll probably be the backup center right now. Unless we draft someone, he'll move over to right guard. And the backup right guard I have right now is Nash Jensen. I like his grit, but there were some plays that obviously you saw like his faults in, and I don't know if he's going to stay. Same thing with the backup right tackle. That's Ricky Lee. I like Ricky Lee. I think he has some really good traits, but it just depends on what Dan Ward wants to do. If he wants to continue to invest in the draft, which he probably will, so you can keep them on long contracts at a very cheap price. Now for the defense, there are a lot of holes in this defense, but I don't think it's as bad as people say, especially with their one signing, and they're going to go after another outside linebacker. I'll get to that in a little bit. But right now, the front three, your left end, your nose tackle, your right end, those are set. I really like what we have right here. Obviously, Ashawn Robinson, the left end, Shy Tuttle at nose. You can technically flip both of them because they played at both roles, and then Derek Brown at right end. I am praying that we pay him either this offseason so we don't have to worry about it, or that is a massive priority that we have next year because we cannot have this situation happen again. We're having a Brian Burns. That was a mess up on Federer's part. Don't blame him. I'll talk about more in my video, but please make sure that you keep a foundational piece like Derek Brown here. He is hitting his stride. You might have to pay him the big bucks, but he is worth it. And I hope so because I'm also an Auburn fan. I love when we drafted him, so I'm hoping we keep him. And then the backups for left end is LeBron Ray. Really good rotational piece. Had a couple good plays. Same thing for the nose tackle. That's Nick Thurman. I love both of those coming back as well because they played really well last year in the rotation. And then right end, Roquan Williams. I don't remember that much about him. Nothing really sticks out to me right now. But as far as like a rotation that we have right now, I'm okay with what we have. We could potentially still go in the draft if we want to, but it's not necessarily a big need like people are trying to make it seem. Now for linebackers, we not only do we need starter at outside linebacker outside of one of them, but we also need depth at interior. So at outside linebacker, we have DJ Wonnum and we have DJ Johnson. I think DJ Johnson could be the starter over like Barno or Leota, even though I love Leota as an Auburn fan, but also because that's the guy that Evero wanted. If he makes the next step, then I'm going to be very happy with him, but I don't think he's there just yet. And it's kind of weird that we drafted him in the third round, but that's in the past. And then the starting interior linebackers, that's Shaq Thompson and Josie Jewell. I love that tandem right there. Yes, Josie Jewell doesn't do the best in pass coverage. Shaq does a little better at, but both of them are leaders in the middle of the defense that we desperately need because we're going to have a very young defense. So I love having both of them back. However, we do not have the best backups for them. Shirelis, I think that's how you say his name. Obviously, you'll be able to see how it spells. And then Chandler Wooten, who I love from Auburn, he made some plays, but we need a better backup in case one of them goes down because that's what helped us out last year is that you had Deion Jones, you had Camus Grugier Hill, who worked really, really well in that system because you had a really good backups who had starting experience. So I would like us to potentially go that in the uh a couple of days of free agency just to make sure that we are good. And then obviously, like I said, at outside linebacker, you still have Amari Barno backing up. Um, he's still that project, but I obviously, like I said, we still need to make sure we either a big focus in the draft or we sign a free agency so we don't have to get one in the top three picks that we have. First, secondary, it's not as bad as people are saying it is, but we still need to invest some, especially in strong safety. So I'll go through it. At cornerback, we have J.C. Horn. Please stay healthy. You are so good when you're playing, but sometimes it's like he's hitting that stride and then he gets injured, and it's so hard to watch because you know how much potential he has if he can just stay healthy. So I'm hopeful for a very healthy season for J.C. Horn, and then also Dane Jackson. So I love that 1-2 combo. Obviously, J.C. Horn is going to take on the bigger receivers. Dane Jackson, who was at the Buffalo Bills, did a really good job with Trey White being hurt. So I really like that tandem. And then nickel being Troy Hill. I think Troy Hill, he did a really good job in the nickel. Obviously, him and Dane Jackson can, work interchangeably. Even technically, J.C. Horn can play the nickel. So I like those three cornerbacks. And then our backups, DiCaprio Boodle, he did a pretty decent job. I mean, he's not like starter level, but if he needed him to work in a pinch or to like sub in for somebody, he he does his job. And I think that's something that Evero liked about it last year. And I think that's the reason why he's going to stay around. Same thing for Deshaun Jameson. I think both of them worked really well. When Jason Horn did get hurt, they held their own. And I think they got the respect from Evero to be able to work in the system. So our five cornerbacks, it's not to me the biggest need. Sure, it would help if we invested in that, but I think those five are good enough that all we really need to do is just get maybe a potential like project pick later on, um, because I really like our cornerback room. However, our safety room took a big hit. Of course, cutting Von Bell. Of course, letting Jeremy Chin walk. Those things need to be addressed because right now, all it is that free safety was Xavier Woods, who's still good, and then at strong safety, you have Jamie Robinson and Alex Cook. Now, Jamie Robinson was only having a rookie year last year, so he could potentially, take that next step. But I don't want to chance it where safety is a very big deal, and also it's a very veteran safety free agent class that we can still add to. That I think we will. Obviously, when this come out, maybe we might sign somebody. I don't know. Same as for outside linebacker, we could potentially sign Jadeveon Clowney while I'm filming this. But that's kind of like where the depth chart that I see right now. Obviously, special teams is going to stay the same with Eddie Pinheiro, Johnny Hecker, JJ Jansen, and a long snapper, and then also obviously our returners, Raheem Blackshear and Amir Smith Marquette. So there are still some needs. I've already talked about a little bit more, but who's actually going to play fullback? I would assume you can move Tommy Tremble there, but they're probably going to try to keep him at tight end, so we could still either do an undrafted free agent to be a fullback, or we could transition one of those tight ends to be a fullback. We desperately need strong safety, and we desperately need outside linebacker help as well. Those are the two weak points that we still have on defense that if we fill in free agency, I feel we can go BPA and draft. And that's what I'm hopeful for, because that's where you get the best value, is when you just look at your draft board. Who do you want? Not for need, not have to reach or anything like that. Just get the best player available. Now, for draft needs, we still need a wide receiver. Obviously, talk about the top five. Don't really know what we're going to do. TMJ could still keep him, could cut him. But to me, if Mingo makes that next step to be the red zone threat, we don't need to get that red zone threat wide receiver. But we do need a wide receiver to stretch the field. I think that's going to be an important part of our offense that we don't technically have. Dennis Johnson's kind of fast, but he's not that player for us. So I really want to get a wide receiver who's going to stretch the field. We still need offensive line depth, though it's not very imperative. We need an outside linebacker for good rotation, an inside linebacker depth, cornerback depth, and then safety. Like I said, if we don't go in free agency, that's a desperate need for us. So that's what I had for the free agent moves for the Panthers. Obviously, there's some things that you might not agree with, but I like the moves that Dan Morgan is making to build this team around Bryce. So thank you very much, and I'll see you later.